So tell me this. We talked earlier about how you went about deliberately improving your poetry. How have you done the same thing with prose? How is the process of improvement and deconstruction different?
I divide my prose into two pieces. I mean, I wrote at least a million words in these textbooks where I'd write a biography. And I'd make sure that if I had an author's biography, it would be 2 pages, that it was interesting. People said, God, these biographies are interesting because it wasn't just born so and so. I'd say Guy de Maupassant was born in a rented castle in Normandy. I mean, I'd have just the first sentence would get you. This is writing where it's kind of a I know where it's going. I know it's going to end up where Guy de Maupassant dies, and critics say this about his work. And I've got a book review here. I know the review is going to be 1,200 words because that's what the Wall Street Journal is asking me for, or it's
Mhm.
going to be 2,000 words. And I know the books that are about this, that, and the other. But then there's the kind of writing where I don't know where it's going to end. I know what it's going to be about. I know and I let it go and I get into it, and then I sort of say, I see where I'm going, but I don't feel anything in this paragraph. So I'll take the same ideas and I'll rework it. And sometimes I'll just change this sentence, and the next day I'll change that sentence and this sentence. But then a week later, suddenly this paragraph is full of emotion, is got these little an image or two that triggers other things. If you ask me what I call it layering. In my poetry, I began doing something that I now, which is, that playwrights do. I have a text and I have a subtext. There's certain things that I don't put in the poem that I want you to feel. And I realized that an essay should have a certain subtext too. So you're doing certain things um, that evoke a lot of other stuff that you're not really getting into. But part of it is just making it as interesting as possible. I wrote an essay about a little known poet, and it was a very good essay. But I looked at the thing and I said, why would anybody want to read this when they don't know the work? So I put a few more quotations in and it worked a little bit better, but it still didn't. So then I just realized I needed to describe the guy. So I wrote two paragraphs that are just uh, evoke this weird guy uh, in a way that's both touching and funny.
How, when you're thinking about describing him and you have that challenge, how do you describe somebody well?
People will say, well, so and so, they'll describe him this, that, and the other, and pull from this. No, I think it's always a mistake to describe people that way. You should take a particular situation and recreate that person in that one moment of time as a little story, as a little piece of drama. And everything you want to do, will happen. So I said this guy that, that anybody who had gone to poetry readings in New York at the end of the 20th century would have seen Samuel Menashe, whether they knew him or not. A tall, man always sitting at the, in the, standing in the corner of the room uh, with, with beautiful Hebraic looks. He could have been played a prophet or a magician in a silent film. Uh, and when you addressed him, he spoke one octave lower than anyone else in the room. I'm at the beginning of my New York life. I don't know that people, but I know who he is. So I come up to him and I say, Samuel, how are you? To which he responds, how am I? I am a pariah. He seemed, both depressed and delighted by his situation. So I just evoke this strange guy that has chosen his whole identity to be an outsider, to be a pariah. And so you do this. So I just create a little narrative. It's 2 paragraphs long. It's very funny and it's very touching. And then suddenly I go into the thing about this neglected poet. And you have a sense of a real man in a real situation who is standing in the corner because he's literally painted himself into a corner in New York literary life.
And what do most people get wrong when they try to describe? I'm sure that there's a thousand things that most people get wrong, but fundamentally, when you're reading something and the description just falls flat.
Almost everything that you do should tell a story. I don't mean like a complicated plot of a story, but you should begin in a real place and go to a real place.
Hmm.
If I write a poem that's just images, there should be a story implicit in those images. So when you're describing a person, people will often say, well, so and so did this. And they'll take all these details from different times and places and make an abstract portrait of that person. If you're going to do it in words, the words have got to move in a narrative way.
Mm,
And so I think that what you do is you create a scene in which that person is at the center. Otherwise I think it's just a list of details. And I can't tell you how often when I'm reading a novel they'll
mm.
describe the character and it doesn't mean anything to me after a while. But if they can show how the person moves with their body and depict the size of the body and something, and it doesn't have to be elaborate. It just has to be beginning, middle, end. It can be 3 sentences.
Right.
So I tried to keep myself out of my prose in the early days. I tried to make it abstract, very reasonable, very rational, very intellectual. And it was very successful. I mean, it was very good academic prose. It was very good journalistic prose because, the old fashioned journalist, kept himself or herself out of the story, uh, there. But the older I got, the more I understood that, first of all, uh, if you put yourself not at the center of a story, but on the edge of a story, of an edge of argument, the person can come with you. They know then where to position themselves. And then, secondly, sometimes things that uh, can best be expressed by telling your personal anecdote, by telling a story with your in it, so that they learn whatever it is or hear whatever it is happen the way it happened to you.
Break that down for me.
I was the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts for 6.5 years. And, I can tell you a story of one day in Pittsburgh at a national arts conference. I had to give each hour a speech to a different art form. So I came in at 8 a.m. into the Chorus America meeting and addressed it. And they're all singing and they're all friends because they're all part of choruses and they sing in harmony and they sing at things and they say, let's all sing God, America the Beautiful. And they sing it and they're full of joy and everything else. Then I go to the League of American Symphony Orchestras. And there's room for all these tables, and each table is the board of a different symphony, and there's the board chairman, and you could be among bankers because they've got big halls and they got to fill 3,000 seats for every audit, and they've got to get subscription. So, it's like a banking sort of thing. And you go through this, point by point through all these different groups, and you can convey these things as a narrative as it happened to you. In my case, literally all in one day. If you can create a story, people like to come along with it, and it's a very easy way of making complicated points, which is to say, in this case, is that every art form has a remarkably different personality that's reflected in the artists and in the organizations themselves.
Did you break down other people's prose in the way that you did for poetry?
When I really started to try to improve my work, I went to the people I thought were the best to see how they operated on a sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph.
So you went to them as in you picked up their work, or you went to go speak to them?
No, these are, for the most part, dead people I've never
Okay.
met. I've never met George Orwell. I've never met Randall. There's certain people I think are really good. Randall Jarrell,
Okay.
great prose writer. Of a fellow who died more recently, I never met him. I exchanged a couple of letters. Clive James,
Okay.
who most people know from television because he uh, hosted a show on the great cities of the world for BBC. But I know him as a poetry critic,
Cool.
uh, and he's just terrific. I mean, and I just looked, the way like what Clive James did. He was an Australian who came to England and conquered. Everything he did really well. Uh, and he had this ability to create a paragraph, and he would just have this knockout sentence, and it would just rivet you, and it kind of put everything else in. Randall Jarrell would sort of weave himself in and out of it. Orwell, it's like a tonic note that he had that he would go around, like this. And there's a real sense of controlling his voice, his tone, his idiom.
Hmm.
I mean, it's an amazing amount of control, highly moralistic, but never boring.
So as you're reading somebody like Orwell, you admire him. Is that a process of just reading more of his books? Is that a copy work? I'm going to copy his sentences.
Well, at some time you got to sit down and you just got to look at a paragraph that you think is a great paragraph and figure out why the hell you think it's a great paragraph. And I'll tell you what I learned again and again and again. You see something that this is just tremendous, and you got like 1,000 ideas coming from this paragraph. Then you go back and look at it. It's much simpler. It's much shorter than you remember. Same thing with poems. You'll have a poem and you'll remember all these things. And that's when you learn something about writing, which is you put this much, but once again, you leave things out. You have radiant details. You have these things, and it suddenly it creates all kinds of associations and reflections that it's this battery, and when you link into it, it
Right.
electrifies your consciousness, and that's the thing that I like about Orwell. I like about Jarrell. Clive James does it. Auden does it. Eliot does it a different way. Eliot is very sly and intellectual, and the
Hmm.
stuff comes in sideways. But there's D.H. Lawrence. I mean, when he's not crazy, he's magnificent. Sometimes he's both at once. What I urge people to do is you got to read. You can't be a writer unless you read. You can't be a writer unless you read a lot. And you've got to have make judgments. And you say, well, who are the people you think are really the best? And then you don't have to write a book about them. Just say, well, what do I like about them? And find a paragraph, find a page, and just look at what they do. And you'll be surprised at what they do. It's always going to be a little different from what you remember.
Hmm.
And you'll probably be astounded at how compact and how simple it is once you analyze it. There's another writer I love, somewhat forgotten, named Cyril Connolly.
Hmm.
The way this book begins is wonderful. This is a book about why he never wrote a great book. And it's called The Unquiet Grave. And this is the first sentence. The more books we read, the sooner we perceive that the true function of a writer is to produce a masterpiece, and that no other task has any consequence. Obvious though this should be, how few writers will admit it, or having made the admission, will be prepared to lay aside the piece of iridescent mediocrity on which they have embarked.
Hmm.
I love the phrase, iridescent mediocrity. He's saying that the only thing you can do is write a masterpiece, or nothing else is of any consequence. And if you're a writer and you do this, you should just abandon what you've written on. His first book called Enemies of Promise, which each chapter shows you a different way that you'll go wrong as a writer.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's like no matter what you do, you're gonna end up unsuccessful.
That's great. If you were given that prompt, what are 3 chapters that you would write for ways that people go wrong as writers?
They get a job at the university. They live as a freelance where they've got to crank out things every week. And thirdly, they just decide they're going to write a kind of quick and easy book to get an advance, because the next book they write will be a masterpiece. And I think that each of those things is a trap. You've got to find a way of distancing yourself from the short-term market to make your writing a long-term investment. There's a young woman I know right now that's going through exactly this dilemma, and she asked my advice. She's written a lot of pieces, but finally wrote like a big piece, a big article, and it just got a lot of attention. So an editor from a major house called up and wants to do it as a book, and you can say, well, yeah, because you got a big publisher and you know exactly the book it is you want to write, and he's going to give you an advance. Or you can say no, because you're not ready for a book yet. This article is probably perfect in itself. If you try to turn it into a book, it's going to become a typical nonfiction book. Most of the books that I read have a wonderful first chapter, a kind of mediocre second chapter, and then it's just padding.
Yeah, well, this is a major question then. How do you know that you're ready for a book?
You don't. Everything is a venture. Everything is a gamble. Let me tell you the story of my first book, because this is how bad my advice is for people. This one publisher came up to me and said, "I like your work. Would you give me a book?" And I said, "No, I'm not ready